Hello, Nanog. This is Matt Rantanen from Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association and Arcadian Infracom, and I'm coming to you from my house. I am currently sitting on land that used to be occupied by the Cahuilla Mountain Tribes in Southern California, and I'm going to give you a bit of an update on broadband infrastructure opportunities and connectivity in Indian country, and the events that are kind of swirling about that are dictating what the future looks like for connectivity for tribal broadband. So I wanted to first start out with the fact that we now have a Native American woman in the Department of the Interior as the secretary, and is the first Native American in the presidential cabinet. Clearly the first Native American that has run the Department of the Interior. We're very excited for Deb Haaland and her position and her opportunity to make change for Indian country from within this administration. So let's just get right down to it. COVID-19, how has it affected tribes? Well, let's just put it this way. There has never been a better marketing campaign or advertising campaign for broadband in your home than COVID-19. And you can imagine those of you that live in city environments or metro areas or have opportunities for multiple choices for broadband, and you don't have broadband during this timeline, I bet you got broadband hooked up right away. If you did have access to broadband, imagine that you did not. Imagine that your day-to-day routine didn't include the ability to look things up and order things on the internet. You're looking at a whole nother world. So tribes have been in a real tough spot. COVID-19 is very destructive in the tribal community. There's health issues that lend to COVID infections being much more complicated than other communities, and they've had to really deal with their health concerns. Some reservations have completely shut down. They're only doing things remote with telephone, if they have telephone service. We have talked to tribal leadership that has their entire tribal office forwarded to their cell phone, the leader's cell phone, and they're managing the entire tribe out of their cell phone from their home. We have talked to some tribal leadership that actually has to leave their home to go somewhere to get their email messages, to get their phone calls and listen to their voicemails, to be able to operate from remote, because their home does not have broadband and their home does not have cell coverage. And, as we've previous displayed in the last two times I got to speak in front of you at NANOG, only 70% of plain old telephone services has been deployed in Indian country. So there's no copper telephone lines in 30% of the households. So COVID has really hit hard. Everybody knows we need broadband, tribes especially. And then, so let's throw some layers on top of that. You're a tribal member, you live on the reservation, you drive off the reservation to a job that now has closed its doors unless you can work from home. Well, you now have just been suspended from employment because you don't have the ability to carry on your job duties from your home. Your children have just been sent home from school and are being forced to learn from remote, attend school from remote, and you don't have access to broadband. So right there, and I know you know this from city communities and things as well, but it is very amplified in the reservation systems as well as the rural communities surrounding. So it's very, very tough to get through COVID without the services that you need. Just access to health programs, access to Google to look up what is happening to me now. What is the next thing I need to know about COVID-19? How do I get a vaccine? What should I be doing about wearing a mask? Where should I go? Where are my options? None of that exists for people that don't have broadband, and amplified when you live rural and are relying upon it. So that's what tribes are dealing with. What has it done to tribal communications companies that are working with tribes from within tribes to try to support homes that don't have internet? Well, we're very concerned about spreading the virus around, so we don't want to go into a tribal home. And actually, our tribal leadership has mandated in some cases that we cannot go into a tribal home to perform an installation. So we've had to get very creative with installing. We tried large Tupperware boxes with the installation sitting on the porch of the house with a wireless bubble that's turned up that can go through the walls that people can access, hit or miss, weather permitting, etc. We finally got to the point where we understood that tribal utilities persons that were cleared from the tribe monitoring their health and the COVID restrictions had been going in and doing some work in homes, for electricity and for water maintenance and stuff on the reservations. So we have reached out to those tribes and have employed their utilities persons that are policed by their tribe to do 5 to 7 minutes of installation time inside the home to do the small tasks that need to be finished inside the house while our team can work outside the house and mount things on the roof and do the wireless connections, the microwave connections that we do at the Tribal Digital Village Network. So it's very complicated times to operate. We've seen other installation companies wearing full hazmat suits that are disposable, walk into a home, do their installation, walk out of the home, throw the whole thing away, start over. That's a cost that we can't incur, and it still comes with some risk, but at least they're taking some precaution. But the goal is to get people connected to broadband. We have been fighting very hard to get a device in each student's hand. Some of the school systems have devices that they're loaning out. Some of the school systems have cellular hotspots that they're lending out to be able to solve some of these problems. The unfortunate component there is that we don't have cell coverage on all of our reservations in all areas. So those are half measures, and sometimes they don't work at all. I've managed to secure about 1,000 laptops, Chromebooks, and some other types of laptops for youth in Southern California for the tribes of SCTCA. And so we have most of the problem solved of getting a device in every child's hand to be able to do remote learning. And as we come out of COVID-19, we hope to see some of the restrictions but a lot of the health and safety management being respected still to make sure our youth are safe. So in moving forward in this COVID-19 and graduating out of COVID-19 pandemic, and what does it look like after, I think what we need to consider is digital sovereignty. And what does it mean to tribes? What does digital sovereignty mean to tribes? And with the trust relationship with the federal government being sovereign dependents of the Fed, we are responsible for self-governance, and we are, responsible for self-determination. So digital sovereignty allows tribes to basically control their communications future and manage their communications future. If they understand the components of connectivity and infrastructure, they can manage those resources. They can even manage external companies through a utility management arm of the tribe. But having control of those resources and having control of that key component of the tribal government and the tribal operations, I think is a big peace of mind for tribes. And then you take digital sovereignty to the next level, and that is, let's talk about data. Let's talk about proprietary information. Let's talk about what does your visual footprint look like on the internet? And tribes are really getting their heads around how to manage their data and how to make sure that their outward-facing components of their communities are intentional, and that their inward-facing components for their community's use, language preservation, historical components, and proprietary economic development tools and such, are secure. And so, tribes are digging into the possibilities of micro data centers supporting their data. They're trying to understand better the security of the cloud, of different vendors that provide cloud resources. From some of your companies, they're trying to get their head around whether or not their information is safe, when they've heard that pretty much every entity that they can think of has been hacked at one time or another, and information has been lost. There's a concept of who cares about tribal information anyway? Why would somebody want to steal tribal stuff? Well, casinos make a lot of money, and a lot of people are looking for angles to just learn more information about that, and how to fraud the system, or do intentional harm to that economic development. Unfortunately, tribes are still subject to racial discrimination and abuse, and some of the businesses and the data is targeted. And so, even if it's taken from offshore, what's the value of another country getting tribal data? Well, there's a market for these things, there's sales for these things, and so some of the conversations that are being had with tribal leaders that are very traditional but know that they need to be aware of these things are now stepping into these realms. So it means a lot to tribes, and they are fast becoming, I don't know about experts, but well versed in this arena, soon to be experts. And managing their own digital sovereignty is, I think, the next step, especially after seeing the effects of COVID on the reservations. So some of you saw this before when I was speaking at the previous NANOG 76 and maybe 77 as well. There's a lot of tribal concentration in California, where I reside. And nationally, there's 574 federally recognized tribes. I work day-to-day basis with the tribes in Southern California in the circle here, and part of that digital sovereignty component is to have a plan, is develop a plan based on feasibility study, based on tribal departmental needs, on community needs, on governmental needs and economic development needs, and formulating an opportunity to understand those needs in one document or one effort, so that when opportunities come from the federal government, the state government, and other funders, and maybe some partnering opportunities come along, that a plan has already been thought through, and a plan can be applied to whatever that opportunity is coming. It can be tweaked. It's a living document. It's certainly something that is going to evolve over time, but technology changes should be able to just integrate with a plan. Power requirements should be able to integrate with a plan. Opportunities coming down the road ought to be able to integrate right with that plan, and it enables a tribe to understand whether or not, like, a new funding opportunity is applicable to what they're trying to solve for their own community. So, what are the biggest challenges facing internet access today for tribes? There are many. Let's just erase COVID for a moment, and there are the challenges of middle mile fiber. As we see here in the map, there's large holes in how do tribes get access to broadband and to fiber backhaul to the rest of the grid, so they can communicate with the rest of the world and get services on their reservations, if some of that fiber isn't close enough. And with 8,000 missing miles identified at the end of the Obama administration, connecting tribes in the lower 48 states alone, that's a massive undertaking, and an expensive undertaking. So if you see, I've posted the two announced routes for Arcadian Infracom, of which I work with them in partnering in business development capacity and some impact capacity. And Arcadian Infracom breaks ground this summer on the routes. And so the red route that's there involves a little over 250 miles on the Navajo reservation. Our routes are going to interact with six, at the minimum, 6 Indian tribes reservations, and become partners with those reservations, and actually provide services and opportunity for connectivity and economic development to those locations. And so Arcadian infrastructure is the only infrastructure out there that's being built that will be selling, leasing, and IRUs for dark fiber, and providing 400 gig wave services to the reservations from multiple metros. So this is, it's a unique opportunity. It's a unique space and time where this business model makes sense, and there are a lot of solutions that will happen once these routes develop and actually get constructed for middle America that has been bypassed by all other fiber efforts previously. It's not easy, building this middle mile connector. It's fiber runs are the way to backhaul. You can do backhaul with microwave, but it only scales to a certain level. Um, Compression algorithms that squeeze data and allow it to flow through glass or flow through microwave, is advanced, but it's not as advanced as it could be. And wireless won't scale to the capacity of fiber ever. I think the physics don't allow that. There are some great microwave applications, and many that will, stand the test of time for, probably the next 10 years. But to bring an entire community's information data back and forth to the grid, uh, you should be pursuing a fiber backhaul solution. And here is fiber being put down on the La Posta Indian Reservation that connects the east side of the Tribal Digital Village Network. And you think, trenching and stuff like that, and then making these handholds and places for the conduit to come up and go back down for service entrances and such. You know, it's not digging with a shovel. It's a piece of equipment that looks like this, with cuts a big line in the earth, and depending on your geography, you could be cutting through rock, you could cutting through decomposed granite. Some places are sand, which wash away in rain. There's a lot of complications in doing this. So building infrastructure like this is a long process. It's an expensive process. It's typically a 3-year process to get things moving and to get a completed lit project that goes across an expanse of land. So if, let's say, you have 1,000 miles of fiber to run, and you're going to go off of reservation onto another reservation, county land, forest land, all of these things, you're looking at a permitting process and an easement process and negotiations and such. And the reason it lasts 3 years is because a lot of the permitting takes 18 to 24 months. The construction, even though construction is very hard, and it's a monumental task to do some of this stuff, it is just construction. Once you're in the construction phase, you're no longer dealing with the politics of the land. You're no longer dealing with the subtle nuances of navigating, state governments and private landowners and such. And you're actually just building, so you can actually focus at the task at hand instead of dealing with all the chaos that happens up front. So, these are long-term projects, and some of the funding that's coming out is short-term funding, and we're hoping that the federal government can understand, build processes and such. I mean, you're looking at landscapes like this that are, from a distance, it's hard to tell what's going on out there, and the mountainous regions with valleys and different terrain, geography and such. You really have a wide variety of things to cope with, and here is basically, this is Southern California mountains around the tribes in the east side of the county. And here's an aerial view to show where some of those houses are located in some of those valleys around those ridges. So you can see it's not an easy fiber build. There's certainly opportunity, but wireless communications is very attractive because building a tower and not having to trench 5-6 miles in this type of terrain seems a little bit more appealing. However, like I said previously, the wireless does not scale to support capacity expansion over the years, and a number of households connected, and then just the sheer use of data. We've been in the situation of oversubscribing pre-COVID a home maybe as much as 5 to 1, sometimes 3 to 1 direct bandwidth available for 3 homes. You can promise it to 3 homes, and really you have enough to serve 1 home streaming constantly, but the chances are of everybody being home at the same time working on a streaming interface, or a bi-directional communication learning interface at the same time is really rare. Due to COVID, everyone's home. Multiple people in each household are doing those services. They're downloading movies and streaming. They're doing bi-directional communications. They're doing interactive platforms like whiteboard and chalkboard for school learning, for math. They're talking to each other in meetings and transferring documents. And so it's no longer a situation where a network capacity can handle the basic understanding of oversubscription from pre-COVID. Now it's on. It's always on. So a different structure has to be thought about. A different amount of throughput has to be thought about. And now it really starts to put the strain on wireless communications and wireless that could potentially scale to support these homes. Fiber has to get closer to the endpoints. Fiber has to get deeper into the reservation to be able to carry that back out, to be able to send multiple opportunities from the end of the fiber out, to be able to support this many homes during these conditions. So, previously our towers were fairly minimal. They relay stuff back and forth from endpoint to endpoint and transfer it down the road to the rest of the network. And over time, they've evolved. We have some weather in San Diego occasionally. Here's one in snow, and we had snow this last week on the range. The Palomar Mountain Range and the Laguna Mountain Range got quite a bit of snow, almost 2 feet, and so we have those issues as well. But over the years, our tower sites look less like communication towers and more like solar farms. As we've increased the number of devices that we serve communities with, the capacity that those devices can carry on data and share, with multiple connections to the tribe using massive amounts of data now, especially during COVID, the power consumption has increased. So we've had to increase our power capture from the sun. We have 23 towers. 20 of them are off grid, running on solar, and backed up by a propane generator to support the battery banks so that they don't deplete below 50% during times of storms and cloudy environment. And we start to see this really interesting evolution of the power changes, the power needs, and just increasing our footprint on the mountain and trying to be more robust and more carrier grade to be able to be a reliable service. Because everybody's relying on broadband right now. Absolutely everybody. So if we're down, the phone rings before we even see the network go ding, we're down. Phone's ringing. Somebody couldn't get through. One packet didn't make it. Here comes the kids. Here comes the adults trying to figure out what's wrong with the internet. And so we have to be much more aware of outages and support for those outages and ways around downtime. So that was 3 of our major towers that show a lot of solar. We're dragging in a lot of power, storing it in big battery banks, and supporting that communications infrastructure as best we can. So San Diego used to have 3 to 5 day storms, and in the 20 years that I've been there, with the Tribal Digital Village Project at Southern California Tribal Chairmans, we've now seen storms last as high as 7 to 10 days, or at least the clouds remain for 7 to 10 days, where we're not getting true 100% solar capture. And it's been very, it's had a big effect on the networks. And so designing networks for tribes, they have to design robust systems and figure out how to support those systems and make sure that this communication system doesn't go down, because you develop a system that people rely on, and then you're in this cycle of not being able to ever lose that connection because people are very dependent. Very interestingly, we have had to support our grid connected towers with propane generator backup as well. We are in a footprint in Southern California where we have high wind. They're typically called the Santa Ana winds, and they will reach 50 to sometimes 100 mile an hour winds and gusts throughout the county, specifically in East County, where we have tribes and communications like this. And we have had to support our grid tied towers because the power companies are shutting the power off to avoid down power lines and potential fire starting. So we're at the mercy of the light switch, if you will. And so we've determined that we are going to back up our services because we've noticed that many tribal homes are now having a generator at their home for those same time frames where the power gets shut off. And through subsidies and other grants, they've been able to acquire generator support for their individual homes. So when the power went out, we would originally assume that nobody had power, and if our internet went out, it was, along with the people that didn't have power. Well, now all the people turn their generators on and have power and expect to be able to use the internet. So that's been a big shift in the way we've managed our network, and we've made sure that all of our communications towers stay up when the grid goes down or the lights go out. So reservations are very dependent on spectrum, and wireless is clearly an endpoint solution for a lot of reservation land. And what is available, what are the opportunities, and so are there fed and state policies that could be implemented to help tribes in the process of broadband connectivity? I figured I'd just throw the questions out there. I've been asking them of others, and I've been answering them for many along the last 10 months. And yeah, there are definitely policies. So there are opportunities that we just saw happen in the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum allocation that is going to auction this summer. A tribal priority at the FCC was applied to that spectrum allocation, and tribes were able to apply for and achieve a full power license to the 2.5 gigahertz over their tribal land, as recognized by the federal government. Unfortunately, it was a rural tribal definition that was applied that came out of the last administration, and we are hoping to undo that for future rulemakings. So some tribes were ineligible based on proximity to a population base, which we believe is very unfair. So we had roughly 240 tribes have been awarded awarded a license through their application process, and there are still about 200 tribes or applications specifically pending. There were a lot of waivers submitted to the FCC to acquire license over land adjacent to their tribal space. The FCC had pretty strict rules of the recognized space that they had within their systems would be the allowable area. Some tribes have been granted their waiver when they can prove that they have a population base of their tribal members that live on that land, and it's not an exorbitant amount of land. But unfortunately, some tribes have been misled by consultants and freelancers and other companies that have seen this opportunity and we're working with tribes on their application process, and they were convinced that they could apply for an entire county for this spectrum. And under the rules that the FCC set forth, that is not something that that would be eligible for licensing under the tribe, unless the tribe's reservation was the entire county. There was no way for the FCC to do that. And so we've seen a lot of waiver applications still in limbo without decision, and we're waiting to hear a final decision on that. And I would assume that they are working through that process, hopefully with the individual tribes, to understand things. And hopefully, at the very least, those tribes that applied for a waiver will get a license for what the FCC recognized as their land if they deny the waiver. And so, that's a federal policy component. Another federal policy component is to make sure that when they set up funding opportunities, they don't send that funding opportunity to the state for distribution to the tribes. The tribes have a federal trust relationship with the federal government. They don't have a federal trust relationship or a state trust relationship with a state. They have a relationship with the state. They reside within the state's borders, but a lot of times the relationship isn't the greatest. Depending on the political figure that is running the state at the time, it can be quite sour, and the opportunities can be few and far between for a tribe. In the state of California, they're working very actively right now to include their tribes with thought processes around rulemakings and opportunities, and we're very grateful for that. As there are 109 reservations in California, we have a big leadership interaction with the state, and I think that's a good relationship at this point. And unfortunately, other tribes are having a tough time with their state and not getting the ear of their governor and their leadership to be able to solve some of these problems. So there are state funding programs that have extended to tribes for feasibility studies and to create your plan, your technological plan, or your broadband build out plans. There are state support of federal programs where there's matching being done from the state funds to match the federal funds to support the projects that would come into a state. We are very excited that in California, they have required those matching funds to go along with the company that's bringing the services in to actually work with the tribe to actually engage the tribe and get the sign off from the tribe to be able to get those matching funds. So where the federal government did not put that into the rulemaking for their planning purposes on their deployment of funds and requirements, the state has implemented that to receive matching funds. So we thank the state for doing those steps and working with us to better understand what works at those levels. We're seeing a lot of money flow right now through different departments of the federal government. We're seeing some stimulus type funding for COVID relief and such that has been announced and is being defined and is notice of funding opportunities and things are being released so that tribes have access to some of these things. And we ask that that barriers be removed to access this funding, that we have the opportunity to achieve this funding without some of the regulatory things that have previously ridden along with that funding. We're grateful that some of the funding is aimed directly at tribes, and we feel that the money that's flowing through right now is a foundational step towards solving the problem and helping tribes solve their communications efforts. I wanted to say that the release of more spectrum opportunity is huge. This is basically a list of what's available to use unlicensed or lightly licensed, and I think anybody that's in this space surely understands that there's not quite enough out there to be able to be effective in certain environments and communities. And most of the technology that we have access to and the spectrum we have access to is line of sight technology. So, as I had stated about the tribal priority opportunity being applied to all spectrum being available over tribal lands as it comes to auction for other entities, carriers and such, that tribes have first shot at that over their tribal lands. It would really increase the tools in the toolbox to be able to solve these problems. So with those, multitude of spectrum allocations and different things that are out there, the Tribal Digital Village Network has been able to put together, this kind of a beast of a network. It's a little over 650 miles of point-to-point, point-to-multipoint links, and it takes a couple hours to drive from the head end of the network to the tail end of the network. No traffic or no snow on the mountainside, depending on which route you take. Pre-COVID, we had roughly 15 to 1,700 transient student users in after-school programs and libraries and such. And during COVID, obviously that's not available. So all of those kids that were relying on that resource after school to be able to do homework and be able to work with a tutor or a mentor locally, all of those opportunities have sort of dried up. We have done steps like Wi-Fi drive-ins. So basically lighting up a parking lot on a reservation, working with the tribal leadership to identify an area that is safe, in a safe environment, well lit, that has access to the network and has a robust access point that can handle tens, if not maybe 100 connections during a usage time, or maybe it's 24/7, that can be patrolled by tribal security to make sure that people aren't breaking rules of their COVID restrictions, and being safe in an environment where they can use their vehicle to get to an area where they can, perform school duties, perform, work duties, and, just generally communicate using broadband. So that's been deployed in, I want to say, 6 of the 19 tribes that we work with on a regular basis. Some of the tribes have just turned up their access points to be able to reach in the parking lot. We have E-rate services, and there's been a big push on E-rate for allowing E-rate to be, E-rate's typically the first or one of the first connections that a tribe will get to broadband. So to be able to use that E-rate connection outside of the school, it has always been an absolute, oversight problem, and they have restricted it. So most recently, you are able to now amplify your wireless access point to be able to be served outside the building for the purposes of E-rate's education, but you can at least entertain connections outside the building now and allow people to come up and connect to that. At some point, it might be that E-rate, or some sort of a morph of what E-rate was and will be more of a community source of broadband as well, but to be determined and to be negotiated for sure. So we have had the number 12% adoption and 50% access and on 3,050 homes in Tribal Digital Village. Right now, it's we're a little over 50% access, but the adoption rate has gone through the roof. We actually have a waiting list of 200 homes that are trying to get connected, and we're going through those homes as we can. We're now identifying a lot of homes that aren't visual in our visual footprint from our towers, and looking at alternative methods of connectivity. You have the ability to build another tower, but that takes time, and it takes a fair amount of capital expense to do that. You have EPA requirements for building a tower and accessing the road to the tower, or making a road to the tower. You have a lot of complications and things that take time. We are looking at many solutions. We've even engaged some of the concepts around low Earth orbit satellite. Can they fill pockets of the reservation that we can't currently reach? Can we migrate them onto a low Earth orbit solution, and then maybe migrate them off of a low Earth orbit solution as we get to them with fixed terrestrial broadband, and then migrate that low Earth orbit to another community and be able to use that to alleviate the lack of connectivity in certain areas as we're building out our infrastructure footprint. And so you have to get creative right now. It's not all about drawing a line from A to B anymore. It's, how do I get around this problem? How do I solve the situations that we're dealing with in Indian country, and how do I get my government back online, and how do I engage with the federal grant system if I don't have everybody in the same room to tackle a grant application? And how do I get signatures? How do we automate some of these steps? How do we change our bylaws in our tribal government so that we can vote online, not in person, to keep our safety? There's a lot of components to this that are very complex. And what I will say is that, in the general thought process of a United States citizen, oh yeah, the tribe, yeah, that tribe over there, or this tribe over there. What they don't understand is that they're technically a nation. So broadband allows them nation building it's a tool for nation building. So they are responsible for all the components of their nation. And so, it's a lot more complex than, oh, I don't have internet. A lot more complex, because they actually need to be tied to the resources that allow their nation to function. So, what do? You build towers, you get community involved, you do your damnedest to solve this problem, and you rent things, and you get subsidies, and you get funding from foundations and private resources and federal and state resources, and you pool your in-house expertise, and you extend your trust to consultants and folks in the field, and hopefully you don't get burned. You do everything you can to solve these problems. And I will say, with the amount of money flowing around and the conversations about the importance of rural broadband and tribal broadband, that it's as if somebody threw the bucket of chum in the water and here comes the sharks. Even with the 2.5 gigahertz application being applied to tribes and 240 some tribes plus getting access to that application, the opportunities that no one knew existed are coming through the door left and right, and they're trying to now field those inquiries and engagements um, without understanding like who is who in the space and whether or not they're reputable, and without being able to attend national tribal meetings and gatherings where we typically talk about these types of things and engage problem solving and lists of reliable sources and such. Tribes can get taken advantage of, and unfortunately so can anyone. But right now there's a pretty good focus on tribes with the dollars and with some of the applications and stuff for the spectrum that are out there. So we're trying to help everyone understand to do their due diligence and look at the backgrounds of folks and ask for references and to better understand who you're dealing with. I mean, in anything that you do, who are you dealing with, and are they reputable, and can they prove that, and are they offended if you ask? I mean, they shouldn't be offended if you want some sort of references. They should be excited to show you successful projects they've been a part of. That's what we want for Indian country, from Indian country, is that we're engaged with folks that are excited to be working with us and excited to partner and train and help us solve these problems and manage these problems and manage this communication effort for ourselves eventually. So, this group that I'm speaking to today at Nanog, you're tied to a lot of people. You're tied to a lot of organizations. You're tied to a lot of businesses. You're tied to a lot of channels where information flows and things are happening. And we're grateful for the interaction that we've had from people in your group and support we've had from people in your group. And maybe just be mindful of things that you see that are nefarious and things that you see that are positive, and alerting folks to that and bringing those opportunities into the light so that people can understand what's potentially good and what's potentially bad, or the pitfalls of how we walk through this space together. That reservations are really remote, and I love showing this slide because I was in India one time speaking at an international conference about wireless connectivity, and I put this slide up, and I was kind of hemming and hawing about how hard it is to get equipment to the top of this mountain to serve people, and that it cost us, like $1,400 an hour with this helicopter, et cetera, et cetera. And I was followed by a presentation where three basically Sherpa guide type individuals put the entire technology that's at the tower, their tower, on their backs and walk for 2 days, bringing their own food and water with them, and camp out and hope that they brought the right equipment to solve the problem that's at the tower that they hiked to. So I felt a little weird after that, obviously. And but I still like to show the fact that we do have some pretty extreme remote scenarios, and it takes creativity to get to these locations, or it takes me, with a pile of stuff on my shoulder and others like me. But I prefer not to do that. I think my time is better spent engaging funding opportunities and partnerships and such. So we have tribal reservations where a lot of remote management is required. There's a lot of weed growth, there's weed abatement that has to happen. Obviously, Southern California is on fire all the time from wildfire. And, the last thing we ever want to do is be a cause of that wildfire. So weed abatement and like removal and tree trimming and things has to happen on a regular basis. We have generators in the field. We have a bunch of things in the field, and we've been no stranger to getting a tower burned down here and there from wildfires. So, we're very cautious and conscientious about how we manage the environment around our communications technology. But it's something that tribes are going to have to think of moving forward as they step into this realm to manage their own services. So you get creative, unique solutions. You build things into rocks and hide them from the wind so that there's no wind signature on your panels, so they don't get blown a quarter mile away. You tuck things into trees, and the antenna pops out of the tree so that you can serve the community. But down from the valley floor, you can't see the antenna because the tree shields it from the tribe, and it's not an eyesore on a cultural monument to the tribe, or a historical marker, and there's not a big piece of technology sitting in the view line. So I think you got to get creative when you're working in the tribal sphere, especially if you're coming in from outside. I mean, if you're inside, it's hard enough, but if you're coming in from the outside, you have to be aware of these kind of things. You have to work with those folks and understand what is expected, and what would be preferred. Like I said, we're no stranger to natural disaster. The fires are pretty intense, and it's very interesting. And I think I presented here before about this, but that airplane was essentially called in by a previous fire captain who was the tribal chairman of the Paula Reservation. This is on the Paula Reservation, and I was texting him on his phone saying, "Do you see the smoke? It's on the backside of the tower. It's going to burn down the tower any moment." And he texted me back, "Yeah, we got this." And then moments later, here comes the plane and dropping the fire retardant, and you know, blanketing our tower in fire retardant so that it didn't actually burn down our technology resources there. Amazing that we can interact with the fire suppression and fire management folks. But they know where they get their internet. We connect the fire stations to the internet at the Tribal Digital Village Network. So they definitely want their entertainment at night when they're stuck in the station house. And we're not so lucky occasionally. This tower has been saved once before, and then in the second fire a few years later, unfortunately, it was unable to be saved. Currently, in this picture, you see that there's a lot of brush growth around the tower, and that was something that was restricted. We were restricted from being able to remove some of the natural plants to be able to be safer from fire. And now that that's happened, they allowed us to remove plants before they grew back and clear the ground so that when we rebuilt this tower, we would have less signature fuel to burn. But this is what it does to stuff when a 3,000 to 4,000 degree heat wave comes flying through with flames involved. Solar panels don't survive, and oddly enough, that dish still sent packets back and forth. It was no longer waterproof because all of its seals melted. Obviously, the radome melted, but the feed horn and the dish itself stayed intact. So kudos to that. We had to replace it anyway because it couldn't survive any water after that. And then you have acts of vandalism and just abuse of critical infrastructure on tribal reservations. And unfortunately, this incident was done by a tribal member who had been away from reservation and came back to see this tower on their reservation. And who is this company that has the tower on their reservation? And they were a little bit aggravated and aggressive about finding out how this happened, or how this happened to their land. Rather than going to their own tribal office and asking the question, they decided to leave their mark. It's rare that it happens. We've had very little vandalism considering how many towers we have in the middle of nowhere, but it does happen. The real unfortunate thing that we're hearing from other tribes, and as well as like potentially at risk for our tribes, is this is critical infrastructure. And with some of the the just general hatred of things that are different from some of the community members of the United States, that just don't see tribes, thriving and making their own way as a positive thing. We have seen some targeted things like that. That it's very unfortunate that our communities are targeted for these things, but we've seen things get destroyed on that level as well. So trying to be a positive influence to our community and our surrounding communities and support the rural communities around us. But, still it's tough in this day and age to keep that positive flow going and keep everybody happy. Not everybody's happy. And especially during COVID, it's a complicated time. And I think there's a lot of stress on individuals and, coping with this is a delicate issue. And so we hope that building more broadband and providing connectivity to folks during this time and after this time, and giving them some assurance that they have connectivity moving into the future, and they won't be left in the cold or in the dark or without the ability to engage, will change some of that thought process and will give some peace of mind. Again, I'm very excited to announce that Arcadian will be shovels in the ground this summer, and we look to the future when those routes are lit and supporting the customers on those routes, but the tribal communities and the rural communities that we will serve along the path as well. And just happy to be changing the landscape. We have several funds coming out of the federal government that are looking to stimulate the growth in the broadband arena. There is $1 billion that's directly coming to tribes. It's coming through the Department of Commerce, through the NTIA section of Commerce, and they're actively trying to release their notice of funding opportunity there. Tribes will get an equitable distribution of that to be able to deploy based on need, we think, and potentially just based on opting in. And it'll be a foundational start for a lot of locations and supplemental to others. And we're looking to help tribes step into this arena if they're not already in this arena, but also looking to help shepherd the process so that they're not wasting money on missteps due to accidental or intentional problems that they could run into in the system. I will say, with 240 tribes getting a license to 2.5 gigahertz, and potentially all of those tribes and others getting access to some of this $1 billion and some of the other funding that's coming out of the next round of funding that's been signed. There may not be enough good actors to go around to help support tribes in this. So there may be opportunities where we could rely on folks from your networks and from your background and your companies to be able to provide training or to be able to provide insight into network management and or opportunities to attend such events when things open back up, or online events where knowledge can be gained from the community so that they can be better network managers as they're stepping into this realm. And we look forward to working with the Nanog community to being able to identify those opportunities and bring folks from the Nanog community into the tribal community, and having some partnerships and sharing some information with each other so that we have a better understanding from outside in and from inside out, like how to do this professionally and support our communities. So I think with that, I will close out and thank you for your time today. And I will be available to answer questions for a period of time. And I hope you're all doing well. Your families and everyone are safe, and see you on the backside of this pandemic. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that presentation. Thank you, Matt, for all that wealth of information. It's now open for questions, and I think we already have one going forward. So on to you, Matt.
Thank you, Ed. Let's see. I believe there's a question about training for supporting the infrastructure on the reservations. Has anyone asked the Network Startup Resource Center to provide workshops, etc.? Actually, I was having a conversation about that very item yesterday with Steve Hooter at NSRC, and there are some opportunities, and we'll put that out. I think what we'll do is we'll probably share some information back with Nanog to be able to post it where this video will live at the end for some resources so you can share with tribal folks. But training is a key component moving forward. There will be a deficit of good training individuals to work with tribes, knowing that 240 plus tribes got access to a 2.5 gigahertz spectrum license, and that there's $1 billion coming out of NTIA in the next couple of months to be able to support broadband for tribes specifically. So there will be a deficit of people to work with for the tribes to rely upon on some of that technology and training. So we'll definitely make resources available.
Okay. See, are there any other questions for Matt right now? So we'll give you folks a few minutes to type in any questions that you have. Matt, any additional insights that you have on what's happening in the area?
Well, I mean, I kind of unloaded most of it, but I feel like there's sort of like a feeling in the air of what next, sort of that hurry up and wait. What is my next step? How do I make a decision on this? And I was doing an interview, I think yesterday, where really we're trying to help tribes wrap their head around what this is. So building broadband infrastructure is no small chore. And doing that, you really want to consider what your human capital is. And this is what came out yesterday that I don't know I got a chance to touch on completely. Do you have the capacity within your reservation to actually take on this objective? And do you have the people dedicated to that? Not that you can assign to it, but people that are actually passionate about the project, passionate about the opportunity. Do you have that kind of a resource in your reservation? And if you do, then harness that energy and give them the tools they need to move forward. If you don't, there are a couple other models of how to do this. You can easily work with an external company to come in and bring the resources in. You just manage the opportunity from the tribal perspective so that you have expectations under control when a company comes from external, and you can help manage that. There are some situations where companies will come in and invest with you and probably bring matching funds through different avenues, and they'll help build the infrastructure and help manage the infrastructure, and then help hand that infrastructure off with training as you work side by side to build out the network in the reservation space. So it's really a thought process of around, do I have a department that can manage this existing? Do I need to stand up a different silo or department to be able to support this, but then integrate with my other departments, education, et cetera? And then do I need to stand it up as a company? Am I going to be, seeking revenue and subscriptions and things like that? And does it need to stand alone as a tribal corporation? These are the thought processes that tribal government and the different entities within the tribe need to consider, because it isn't a small feat to manage communications infrastructure for even a small tribal village of a couple hundred homes. And then, you move into some of the larger tribes and the larger reservations where you have 7,000, 26,000 square miles, and then what do you do? How do you manage that? So
do you have any predictions on when we'll get this problem resolved across North America? I mean, like 10 years out, 15 years out, any thoughts?
I would love to see this. I would love to see this in 10 years. So one of the things that I did when I was working with the Obama administration in the last year of his administration, and the CTO of the United States, Megan Smith, we identified the missing middle miles, and that was 8,000 in the lower 48 connectors to the reservation, to a meaningful location on the reservation where they could take advantage of that. And some of those have disappeared in the last 4 years, but not a lot of them. It's still well over 7,000 miles, and so that alone is a billion, $1.5 billion, depending on easements and right of way and the struggle to get the fiber built to those reservations, depending on how far it is. We did some rough math, several industry experts and myself, some desktop engineering and some averaging, and came up with $1 billion or $1 billion figure of $7 billion, not $1 billion. What we're seeing coming out of NTIA through the last CARES Act 2 is going to be $1 billion, which is a great foundational start to this, with some arm twisting and opportunities and things. There have been ways to sort of eliminate some of those gaps and some of those costs. Certainly programs like E-Rate, where you can open the trench to connect your library, school, or Head Start program, but the tribe can throw its own assets into that trench at the same time, has eliminated some of those miles and increased some of those opportunities. So, it's a big chunk. At that time, it was a $7 billion problem. After we see this $1 billion roll out and a year go by where everybody has to spend that money or allocate that money, I think we might have really a better understanding of, is it 6 billion more, or are we further along than we thought? And, what is really needed moving forward. So 10 years would be a great timeline to have this solved. It looks like.
Got another question?
I was going to say there was another follow-up in the chat. Celeste from Pacific Wave said, is there anything we can do to help you take advantage of being connected to the exchange? So, and I think maybe we're referencing specifically the fact that the Tribal Digital Village Network is connected to Pacific Wave and Scenic. And there is an international peering fabric that lays over top of the network that allows basically all of the indigenous populations in the Pacific that are connected to this. We should be able to communicate. We should be able to create a structure, and that could happen internal to the United States as well. A structure where, we sort of have a private space or an indigenous space to interact with each other and maybe share resources and things. And yeah, a lot of thought process needs to go around that. And I will be, I think we're posting my emails. So please, Celeste, follow up on email.
Yeah. And then another question for me in the time frame to see if we have anything else come in. Are there any particular future technologies that you think are going to be able to help in this area of getting connectivity?
You would ask that question. I can sort of answer that question. So yes, there's some new tech, and there's some tech that's been around for a while in development that is hitting the market. There's a lot of optical stuff happening using laser and different things. Depending on where you live, depending on what your weather looks like, depending on your clarity of your air for point-to-point connections and stuff, there is some really neat stuff happening in that space. So we're looking forward to test driving some of that in the Southern California space, as well as potentially using that technology along with the fiber builds that Arcadian's doing. There's some really neat things that could happen. The other thing that happens in this space is compression technology for data, right? Yeah. So those mathematical wizards that are learning how to squeeze bits and bytes even smaller and package them even tinier and squeeze them down so that they are smaller as they travel across airwaves and they travel across glass. Those are exponential changes as well. So I think we have, within the short future, I think we're going to see some better compression technology. Building networks on reservations almost always requires something to run off grid. And, solar technology has changed dramatically in the last 20 years. But battery technology, we're seeing some of the changes that are being done in the electric vehicles and stuff have really changed the industry of just general battery consumption and storage. So I think battery storage for power has changed a bit too. So we're kind of excited across the board about some of the opportunities that have happened.
Good. Let's see if there's any more questions. I don't see any. Well, thank you all for attending. And thank you, Matt, especially for your time and effort and energy in putting in this. And we look forward to following everything that's going on and keeping us up to date. Because I know at NANA, we're really committed toward increasing diversity and connectivity within North America. So thank you again.
Always a pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you everyone for attending, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Take care.